Cool. So let me talk to you a little bit about Michael. And what I did learn is that, so this book getting promoted, from what I heard from your story, comes from a motivation that happens to many of us, right? Which is, um, sometimes we get angry, right? We get angry because people are passing by, getting promoted, and they're not necessarily the most qualified persons in our minds, right? And then I know that this was the original motivation for your book, but it's not only the book, it's the work that you have done in life in different perspectives, right? So we have the world here in the background, but you've been in Asia, you've been in Latin America, United States, and now you're in Europe, right? As an executive coach, as a professor, and graduate from Stanford University, major executive from global corporations. So you're bringing now a perspective, and you put it down there on a book. So I wanna ask you, Mike, first, whatever you want to do to introduce yourself, but tell me, how come getting promoted is so important to you? And I've been reading and I've been fascinated, no, by this work. But anything that you want to share to start?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It is great to be here. And to answer your question just straight on, I saw a lot of really good, smart, hardworking people get passed over, get screwed in their organizations, and saw a lot of people who were rising above them, either pretty ordinary, pretty mundane, or frankly, if we actually look at most of the leaders, from the political to corporate organizations, we see a lot of very alpha narcissists rise to the top. And so when you see a lot of good talent get passed over, I got upset about it. I saw very good people on my team, as later on in their careers that happened to them. And so first, when you get angry, I think the first thing that everyone should do when you get angry is first take a pause and be a little curious about it. And so it led me to kind of researching, why is this happening? Why are certain people rising and certain people not? And the fact of the matter was, there's a lot of great research, and we're going to talk about some of that in organizations. And then there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from what the people who are getting promoted do. And you can harness those in ways that aren't going to make you unethical, that aren't going to make you that alpha narcissist that's going to drive an organization to the ground. But a lot of people have very negative associations with that, clashes with perhaps a lot of our upbringing and values. But we need more good people at the top. We need more good people who are making an impact and not on the sidelines. And so that's what I've dedicated myself to doing, and that's why I wrote the book also.
Interesting. The other thing that caught my attention is you talk about this kumbaya concept, that everybody has to be, a team player, and be nice, right? But then you mentioned something about, as I was reading, you talk about being authentic or not, right? So what does being authentic or inauthentic have anything to do with rising to in your organization?
So there's, I would say a key word that we hear all over the place. It's, if you Google it, it has kind of peaked. And a lot of this is in reaction to a lot of the really negative leaders that we've had. If you look at corporate malfeasance, bullies in the workplace, a lot of negative things happening. And so there's been this kind of counter movement towards these very kind of aggressive alpha, even bullying behaviors. And so nothing wrong with things like, positive thinking, being authentic, servant leadership. However, that's if you kind of think of these pendulums, like I would say it has gone very far where the word authenticity in some ways has lost no meaning. So you have to actually ask yourself, how do you define authenticity? And I would say when I work with a lot of executives or folks that I coach, people will say, well, authenticity means, I should say exactly what's on my mind. I should be sharing, what's going on. And so you have to be very strategic. And you've heard this from other speakers about what you are sharing in your organization. Yes, you want trust, and I absolutely believe this, but you need to kind of trust but verify, because not everyone out there has purity of intent. People and some of your colleagues you're going to learn are going to take credit for your work. Some of them are going to backstab. And so you need to be protecting yourself at the same time from what we might call political stuff going on, power plays, et cetera. We can talk more about that. But what I would say here is think about how you define authenticity and reframe this, because you just sharing everything about yourself or saying, all this stuff about being vulnerable, right? We're big into now safe spaces, and those are the things that we need in organizations. But chances are, if you go in and you think the safest space is safe and it's not, someone may be using something you're sharing against you. And let me just give you one example. I've seen this happen to multiple executives I worked with, right? Their boss will say, well, what do you want? Where do you want to go? And most of us early in our careers in particular, maybe we have a good idea, but we're not totally sure. So we say, well, I'm not so sure. Some bosses are going to read that as weakness, and they're going to say, this kid or this individual doesn't know what they want. And then I've heard, when they eventually fire that person, they say, well, you never wanted the job anyway, right? You weren't ambitious and you weren't focused enough. So here is to kind of filter and manage the things that you are saying in your organization until you build that level of trust, which many of the speakers have talked about. So I call this trust but verify. Be very careful about that and watch the types of things that you're sharing. Kind of watch oversharing. If we were all walking around like the cartoons with what we were actually thinking, you might think your boss is an idiot. That's probably a career limiting move to tell them that or insult them or make them look bad publicly. Okay, so we're talking about some political skills that may be basic to many of you, and many of you have probably already learned, but to some of us we haven't, and a lot of individuals feel like, oh, now we can just be authentic and share everything and everything's safe, but we can't. It actually does come and bite a lot of us on the butt. So that's where I'm coming at with authenticity, Hernan.
So it's interesting because you remind me of the day that one of my mentors grabbed me on the side and said, because I don't know if you guys know, but I'm a singer. I sing, and I've been singing since I was 5 years old. And one of the things that I used to do in banking conventions is I used to hang out with my friends, happy hour, and then I used to sing. And then, I got into bigger stages. People started saying, oh, the singing banker, right? Until one day in my late 20s, my boss says, you know what, Hernan? I appreciate your talent and what you do, but I don't think this is the appropriate place to do that. This is a banking convention, and it's not to discredit the niceness that you have, but I don't know if you know, but U.S. banks, particularly the bank that you work for, they might not like that. So I would consider you doing that in your in the karaoke bar by yourself, but do not bring that into the mix. And I noticed that immediately after I started doing that, my career started going up, no? Because they took me a little bit more serious. What can you say about the mistakes that some of the young folks do by trying to be too nice sometimes?
Well, yeah, and I'll answer that. I want to kind of also just add on to this. There are times where and I say this in the book, and this also gets people thinking a lot, where you're going to want to be inauthentic or what you perceive to be inauthentic. And let me give you a couple examples here. There may be times where you're not totally confident, like there's a problem that's going on. And you coming out and saying, I have no idea what's going on, which is perhaps your authentic response, is going to look like you're not in command and handling stuff. So an inauthentic response there may be, Well, we've got the best team and we're figuring out what the problem is and we're confident this is going to get solved. So it's actually bringing kind of a different perspective to your audience. And so there are things that you may need to be doing that may feel inauthentic in terms of how you're showing up. And I guarantee if you kind of go look back in your own careers today, right? When you first learned how to ride a bike, it didn't feel comfortable, right? You were learning some new behaviors. And as you start to move up your organization from an individual contributor to a manager to a leader, there are going to be certain new skills that you're going to be needing. And each of those learning those is going to be uncomfortable. And that's actually how we grow. And oftentimes I find, from younger all the way through to many executives, them saying, well, I can't do this because it's not my authentic self, is them holding on to this very rigid definition of who they are, what they're willing to do, kind of your toolkit. And so if you think about this as expanding your toolkit, you're going to get a lot further. And to go to Hernan's question here, what are some of the top mistakes that I see? Well, the biggest mistake is realizing these aspects that we're going to talk about, okay? The things that propel people, political skills, your networking ability, executive presence, how you communicate, your visibility and brand, not taking those seriously enough and believing that simply my work is going to speak for itself. Now, I am not suggesting that you go do crappy work. I mean, many of you and almost all of you who are here got here because you're doing great work. What we are talking about is the thing that actually research shows actually propels people up because we're working with other people. It's not about intelligence. That gets you to a certain point. Your hard work gets you to a certain point, but these other pieces are the things that propel you. Again, we need good people who are getting at the top, but a lot of good people get stuck on this. And the ones who don't are the alpha narcissists who have no qualms in leveraging relationships, no qualms in coming up and showing, how they show up quite strongly and getting visibility and brand, self-promoting. You can use a lot of adjectives here. They have no qualms with these things. So learning these skills and learning how to harness them in very strategic ways, and this is what I talk about, and building this into part of what you do, that is going to help you immensely.
Interesting. So it brings me to a point where I had another conversation with one of my mentor bosses that told me, Hernan, you take things too personal and you have to be like me, a gringo. He told me like that. You're too Latin, he told me in my face. You have to be like a gringo. And I'm like, what do you mean? You have to be like Teflon. Everything that gets thrown at you, just let it slide. Because, and he would say, and he would give me an example. People that he was battling with in emails, all of a sudden I see him the next night going to happy hour like nothing happened. And to me, I would have, at that time I would have ripped his head apart if I were in his position. What advice can you give in dealing with, these situations and managing anger, I guess, no?
Yeah, so it's the one I talked about before, is the moment that you're furious, first get curious. Put a stop sign and hold yourself. This is one of the huge pieces, kind of the self-control that you're going to need. Because you want to be careful that you're not saying stuff that you regret. Burning bridges, so to speak, particularly, and this is an area I work on, there's power dynamics in companies, right? So this part that we've talked about and you've heard multiple times, to be careful with your boss, right? Your boss is probably the one who's, for better or for worse, who's going to promote you, who's determining your compensation. It is not objective. It is highly subjective in organizations. And it behooves you early on, we can talk about an exercise, that you should know from day one who is promoting you. Okay, this is essential information, because guess what? It's not people down below you in the organization. It is people above. And then who influences those people? So this part around managing conflict, and conflict is not bad. We can talk about ways that it is a way of kind of expressing things and getting ideas out there. Be careful about the personal attacks that kind of digs in, and then you've got people, against you and actually in power positions who, may want to see you fail. So I'd say this is the biggest thing, Hernana. First, just kind of being less judgmental, stepping back, and managing some of these things, because you are going to see this in your organizations if you haven't seen it already. Some pretty unbelievable stuff, right? About the boss's pet moves up faster, right? A lot of things will happen. And so you need to be able to diagnose those and manage those. And that's not only help propel you, but as one of the things I say, and if anything you take away from this session also, if you can use a lot of these skills, my one hope is that it's going to make sure you don't, involuntarily have to leave an organization. That means you get victim to a power play and you're therefore pushed out to the side, or the victim to some of these office politics. You need to be able to kind of diagnose those, and you need to be able to navigate them. Okay, and we can talk about whether staying in the organization is always the best thing. I would say it's not always. I would say you should always have 2 other job offers somewhere else, knowing what your market value is. These are very good pieces of career advice. Okay, and I'm not saying all organizations are this way, but there are a lot, and you need to take care of yourselves.
Interesting. What about if your boss is a jerk and you report to that guy, and then everybody hates you because you work for that asshole? Sorry for the word.
Yeah, and this is the piece where if your boss is a jerk, we can talk about managing jerks if they're, or bullies. I mean, you can take this many edges of the spectrum, right, to doing stuff that's unethical and illegal, and that's where you start to reach HR and so forth. But one of these pieces is knowing that relationship with your boss, how much the boss is probably taking credit for all your work, not advocating for you. And so you also want to be building relationships, that keyword again you're hearing, with a lot of people across the organization. Okay, because otherwise you're not going anywhere probably with that boss. At the same time, you're going to have to manage these other dynamics where people, dislike you because you're working for that boss and so forth. And there's where kind of, again, the relationships, I would say if that's a very toxic relationship, you probably don't want to be in there for very long. So this is where knowing where you've got other options outside the company, we don't always have that, but also kind of managing in a way and eventually finding ways to build relationships around that boss and probably eventually getting out of there.
Well, it's funny because obviously one of the things that another one of my bosses, Tom Ovation Austin, who you work with, told me about politics. He said you can be either in the sidelines and be affected by it, or you can be a contributor. And one of the things that I learned, maybe your experience is similar, is that I don't look at office politics anymore as office politics. I look at it as relationship building or relationship improvement. So I don't use the word politics when I'm dealing with things inside a large organization, because it doesn't, the activity that I do in my outside work and the activity that I do in the inside work is very similar. It's building those relationships. What can you talk about, engaging in politics?
Here is one of the key things we do as coaches, right, when we're working with individuals. And that is getting you guys to think about reframing many of these words. There's actually an exercise in my book where, you can put office politics, brown nosing, all of the words, on the one hand, all these negative associations. And if you kind of reframe that, Hernan has done that in a way. You find a way that works for you to reframe things. You realize, right, that one takes kind of the negativity off it. And you realize also that office politics are like the air that you breathe. It is around you. And you need to be able to manage those things. I would say it's actually part of your job to be managing those things. You need to know who is getting along with who doesn't get along with who, so that if you're trying to get a project done, you'll know who influences who. You'll know where the minefields are. And if you're then managing a team, this is one of the things when I'm working with a lot of individuals, they think, well, if I'm playing office politics, I'm, having lunches with the bosses or, doing, special projects for executives. Absolutely, those things you should be doing, having mentors, having sponsors, because that's also helping you realize what way the winds are blowing in the organization. And then as a boss, organizations are not fair, right? Who's getting more resources, who's getting more headcount or budget depends a lot on relationships, depends on your ability to convince others. And so if you're doing a good job getting those things, you're actually going to help the people on your team. So it's not just always about you, because those people, if they're not getting resources, they're not, you're not getting promoted, then they can't get promoted. Guess what? Where's good talent going to go? It's going to go somewhere else and not stay with you. So to be thinking about these skills, these things you need to do that are, more than just it's me getting promoted. It's my initiatives making an impact. It's about the team, the things that we're doing, being able to move forward.
Interesting. I'm gonna throw you some minefields. But before I do that, you talk about the concept in the book, which is phenomenal. You visualize it: the rock, map, and the snowball. The rock being, where you're really, grinding because you're coming to the realization of things that you weren't, and it hurts, no? And then mapping, and then taking advantage of the snowball to create momentum. You want to share a little bit about the ideas here?
Yeah, so the rock, the map, and the snowball, very easy way to remember this. The rock is about getting real. The map is about getting strategic. And the snowball is about getting doing. Okay? Get real, get strategic, and get doing. And one of the things, right, why we put things in frameworks, and you ought to be thinking about when you make presentations, people remember simple, memorable ideas. Okay, so you think about your communications. I see this all the time. I coach a lot of engineers. They will talk about 7 different things. No one remembers 7 things. 3 things, organized very simply, repeated, memorable idea or image stuck to those. That is the way people retain things. So the rock, the map, and the snowball is the way I laid out the book. It is the way I work with a lot of individuals. And Hernan, you touched on it, so I'll just add a couple of things here. The rock is, okay, so it's hard truth, but again, there is very good social science research, okay, that's been written, right? Unfortunately, it sits in a lot of academic journals that we don't look at. But it has been shown, right? Actually, if you go down to Florida, the political skills inventory, right, comes from a professor down there, right, in the 1970s, Gerald Ferris, okay? And this has been validated over and over about why the political skills are more important than intelligence to helping you rise and what gets people promoted in organizations. Okay, so I'm saying, and I break down that research because a lot of people don't want to break it down, and you think about these 4 drivers that really move you. But of course, it's one thing to kind of accept that, and the other thing is how do you put it in practice? So the map is about getting strategic, and we all talk about it, and I think this is the other part of authenticity, right? What's our true north? Where do we want to go? Well, I want to flip this around on you guys and say, you may have your true north where you want to go. But if you don't look at what the landscape looks like in front of you, right? If you're climbing a mountain, yeah, you want to get to the peak. But if you don't look at the routes, the problems that are going to get in the way, you're in for a lot of trouble. Because you've actually got to get from point A to point Z, you got to go through a bunch of things first. And so if you do this on your organization, this whole part on understanding politics, who controls resources, what matters to them. A lot of this is not so much what matters, and there's a format exercise in here that, and I want to bring this up, and I actually want to do a very quick thing. I want you guys all get your Zoom here. I heard at the beginning when I first came on all of these great things that you guys have learned from your mentorship, and the series. What I want you to do, just write down, is to say, in the next week, what one thing that you've learned from these last 4 weeks are you going to actually go do? Just write it in the chat board. All of you who have gone through this series, and be specific. Be very specific about what you're going to do. Type it into the chat board, what you're going to go do. From this 4 weeks, just one thing that you're going to, and you're going to put in action. And I'll give you guys a second if you're typing there. Okay, post on your LinkedIn experience. Good, and I would say, Christopher, could you get even more specific there around that LinkedIn experience? And if we talk about some of these principles of highlighting other people, you know, what could be more specific there? Communicate better. Sanika, this is good, but that's general. But then what you said is be more precise. Okay, I want you to take that even further, is to say, in the next week, when are you going to have a communication opportunity that you're going to go use this in? Because communicate better, I don't know when that's going to happen. Like, you have a presentation coming up, you're going to meet with your mentor. What is this going to be? So, Sanika, add something there in terms of when you're going to do it, what that's going to look like. Bobby, I'm going to reach out to some of the people I've connected with and ask if I can volunteer for them. Put down their names here. Okay, if you don't want to put their full names, put their initials here, Bobby. Like, let's get specific here. And so this, and you can continue adding some things here if you want on the board. This is the snowball. You can understand the stuff that drives you, the rock in an organization. You can map things out and see the path. But at a certain point, you need to start doing. So the snowball is about getting, doing, and moving forward. And a lot of ourselves, Hernan, you asked the biggest mistake a lot of people make. Biggest mistake, right? Because we're afraid that we're going to make a mistake.
Can you repeat that? You got cut off.
We've made lots of mistakes.
You got cut off, okay. Michael. Can
you
repeat?
Need to do, right? Because, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it okay now? Okay. You need to get doing, and you need to put things in practice, because we are afraid, right? I'm not going to be perfect. We're afraid to go ask for sponsorship because someone's going to say no, or we're not going to get it totally right. Well, this is how we learn, right? By doing things. You're never going to get things perfect at first. And so the snowball is getting, doing. And again, Hernan, the number one thing with a lot of executives is they realize the things they need to do, but then they don't do it. And even if you fail, think about reframing this, right? The first time you were, playing a new sport, you weren't getting the stroke perfectly right. You had to do repetitions. You had to get coaching. You learned from some of those mistakes you made. So get doing. And this is the part here about the snowball, is you learned a lot of stuff, but you got to put it in practice. And that's why I was pushing a bunch of you to say, what are you specifically doing in the next week? I used to be a sales trainer, right? So if the sales reps didn't go out in the field and put some of the things in practice within 7 days, that training was wasted. That training was wasted because they didn't go do it. So it's that muscle memory you're building here. And the beautiful thing about these principles is if you put them together, you get better on them, particularly earlier in your career. I would say a lot of us, Dario, Hernan, myself, we're not as good at them early in our careers. You can always learn, but hey, if you can start it now, you are going to be that snowball that grows exponentially. That's the beautiful thing about these principles. If you do them well, they will snowball.
Interesting. So, minefields. Let me throw a few at you. Okay, I'm going to say a word.
Okay.
And you tell me couple of words, and you tell me your, within the context of your book, what do you think about this? First, people from Asia.
People from Asia. What do you want me to comment on this?
So I heard you say at some point that people from Asia have sometimes they're smart and diligent, but have a problem sometimes promoting themselves. No.
Okay, I would say this goes more than beyond Asia, but there is certainly in many cultures this overly humble, don't participate, don't lift up your head because it'll get cut off. You know, this you hear this in many cultures. And I would say is to ask yourself, is that serving you? Is that serving you? And I would say to look at, again, a lot of the research here is those that are speaking up, filling airtime, almost a lot of times in empty ways, are getting noticed. And so it behooves you to speak, because a lot of times people then make attributions about you, right? Oh, this person is not confident, they don't know their stuff. Okay. And so I'd say to be looking at this, but again, an exercise I would say, because I think all of this spans across cultures, is for those of you guys who are starting in a new organization, okay, or even if you're in your organization, okay, you will hear a lot of things from leaders and HR. They will pin things on the wall. The servant leader, team leaders, this is the stuff gets promoted. The exercise you need to do is you look at the last 5 people. Go study the last 5 people who were promoted in your organization. Okay? Who are they? Right? Down to men, women, race, gender, right? You know, look at all these things. Where did they study? What did they, you know, who do they spend their time with? How do they spend their time with? Be very clinical, like an anthropologist who's looking at this. Not the things that people say, because people will say a lot of different things from what they actually do. And then look at people who haven't been promoted or who have been demoted. And what you're going to, this is called study success. It's an exercise. But to break it down very simply, look at the patterns that you see. And I guarantee you're going to see the things that are being valued and promoted in your organization. Okay? Because there are some differences in context in cultures. Okay? You know, so if Christopher, right, is going into his new organization, and guess what? It's all white guys from Harvard who worked for 3 bosses, you know, and they were not team players. They just went and crushed deals for their boss, right? So all this stuff about servant leadership, team stuff, diversity, that organization, and so when you see, okay, it gives you a good idea of what's getting promoted. And then, Christopher, you could take 3 strategies, right? One strategy is say, well, I'm going to need to adapt some of this stuff. Okay, maybe I wasn't a guy from Harvard, but I could figure out ways I have to adapt to this culture. And I'm going to have to go do big projects with a couple of these bosses, because that's the way things move. Your second strategy is to say, you know, hey, I don't want to kind of play that game, right? But if you understand some of these principles that we may be able to get into more, get a sponsor earlier on. Think about things that people value, right? And if you can do those things, that's going to help you get promoted. It's like being an impact player with things that you've heard from some of the other speakers. And then the third is to realize, hey, this culture or this organization is not for me long term. I'm going to use it as a platform for now, either get, you know, experience, brand, or whatever, and use that to move to the next organization that's more hospitable to me rising there. So this exercise of understanding the culture and what's getting promoted is really essential. And you can apply this too to, let's say, projects, right, that are getting approved. And to really take a look, because here is the point. Leaders will say a lot of stuff, but they will do other things. We all know, right? Those of us, I studied history, right? Leaders rewrite history. They rewrite it in ways that make them look good. And I will tell you that most of them that rose were not all the nice, rosy team players who simply got up there. Those things are data points that you really need to know. Now, maybe you do that exercise and you find something very different, right? It is team players, right? I see this at some of the very small core of organizations, you know, Google, pockets of Google. team players, so forth, these things, hey, then you got an idea of what that is being promoted there. Take that into account, right? As you're planning your path to promotion. So Hernan, does that help there in terms of the advice on that front? And by the way, guys, also feel free to write up questions or as things come up. I know Hernan's throwing down minefields, but a lot of this material will come at you and it'll rub a lot of people the wrong way. But I do want to say, again, the research would bear me out. And if you look at most of your leaders, many of the characteristics I'm talking about, they embody extremely well. They do extremely well.
So I'll share with you something real quick that happened to me as I was mentoring a young analyst at my bank, which had all the skill set, very smart, very proper, and obviously her demeanor was phenomenal, beauty inside and out, right? Very sharp. She would be dancing at the parties with only one guy, and I pulled her aside, and because I was her mentor and I wanted the best for her, I pulled her aside and said, "You know what? I know this is a public occasion. This is a Christmas party. You wouldn't think much of it, but I would limit that interaction. If you're gonna do it, be strategic. Maybe dance a little bit here and there if you're a dancing person, but just be careful because people are looking at what you do." So, what can you say about unspoken activities and office parties and all these things? I always say that people are always looking at you. Doesn't matter what you do; they're always interviewing you, no matter if you're in a social setting.
Yeah, I would say that this is the point that is spot on. But people are always looking, and until you trust but verify, actually a lot of people are using lunch or these informal settings to really kind of get at, what's going on, what are your motives, what is your inside information that you've got, including, some of your peers. This is the challenge that many of you need to think about. Particularly, it sounded like a bunch of you are going into banking, right? As you rise, your peers are actually your competitors as well. And so there too, this idea of being friends with everyone, or you're going to be friends with everyone at work, you do need to think about that a little bit, because there may be occasions where it's going to be you or them who is going to get promoted. And there are times when we collaborate to get things done, and there's times where you might want to kind of hold the line on sharing too much information, right? Because until you really know what people's motives are, you want to be careful about that. You want to be careful about that. And I would say also, and I'm not going to kind of, brush this aside, there's a lot of hidden bias as well, right? Against women, against minorities, around people of color, right? And so this is where a lot of folks kind of start, behind the eight ball, right? Some people, they've got an advantage just when they show up, right? Because of how they look and how they speak, or their upbringing, or their pedigree, the school they came from, et cetera, the relationships they may already had, alumni within the company. And so here, I would say, again, these skills are actually essential for you if you have, some, I wouldn't call these disadvantages, but these skills are the things that are going to help propel you. You're going to need them, because some of the guys, and they are men, who just walk in will have those advantages from day one.
Yeah. So last question that I have for you, and then we can open it up however you wish. But I feel that because people don't know how to navigate politics, sometimes they get frustrated and put their dreams aside, and or switch completely and say, you know what, I'm going to start an entrepreneurial venture, when in reality they could have been phenomenal at in corporate America, but they just couldn't have the emotional intelligence to deal with these situations at work, no? And then they said, oh no, then I'm gonna go open my own business. And it's just, what I feel is that people that people forget that when they come to work, sometimes you don't want to bring those problems to work. You don't want to come when you're having mental health issues. Maybe it's not the right time to be in a collaborative place. Maybe you have to take care of those mental issues before you engage, to not continue damaging yourself, because that's the thing. I do feel sometimes young people come in and they have a lot of issues, right? Because of the many things that are happening in their lives. They have to take care of business, of their finances. They have to, please their parents, right? And they're coming with a lot of things, but they when they come in and start engaging, it shows that they're having issues, no? And I feel it's damaging in their professional work. What advice can you give to people that in these situations?
Well, it does go to understand the context of the organization and to build these key relationships. And until you've built them and you understand, what that organization is rewarding, what the key people are doing, until you've got a handle on that or those key relationships, be careful about opening too much around certain things. I've seen lots of individuals like share stuff with their boss around their tough financial situation, and pretty much you've just given your boss leverage, if they're kind of evil in a way, of how they're going to negotiate with you. They know that you've got to take whatever's put on the table. So be very careful about some of those things and keep those to the vest until you get those really strong trusted relationships, because again, that is what you want, but it is rare in a lot of organizations. And so take care of yourself. And again, these skills, whether those are networking, and you've learned a lot about that in the last couple sessions here, how you show up and communicate, think about those as new skills that you're developing. This idea, I think it gets overused, of the kind of the growth mindset. So flip those things around as skills that you're going to need, because you guys are going to rise. You will be the future leaders, and I hope that you rise to the C-suite or wherever you want to go. You're going to need those things. It gets lonely up there. And the wider the toolkit you've got, you can then pull out different pieces that you're going to need. You're going to have to let people go someday. That's just a fact of corporate life. And so having these skills is important, because otherwise, if you're always just using the proverbial, hammer, then every problem you see, you're just going to go smack it, instead of like, well, I got a screwdriver here, I got a paintbrush here, I've got all these things that you need. And so you guys have been getting that here over the last several weeks. Take those. And that's why I'm saying also, you don't have to learn them all at once. When you go work on your golf game or whatever sport you play, you're not trying to do 8 things at once. Deliberate practice, Erickson, also down in Florida, This idea of learning, pick 1 or 2 things and focus on them. So that's why, again, I was pushing you on the snowball of pick those things and just start working on them, build the muscle memory, and then all of a sudden you become unstoppable.
Phenomenal. Excellent. Guys, any questions for Michael? Do you want to raise your hand?
Yeah. You can raise your hand, and on mic, you can put it on the video. In the chat board. And of course, we've got, Dario, you can also share any reflection here, because I know you have been through everything in multiple countries, large and small organizations, innovation, et cetera. So there may be questions, but Dario, you can feel free to add any point, because I know you do mentoring as well, and you're great at it.
Yeah, I see some hands here. Moises.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I just have a small question, and it's, what's the worst kind of encounter you can find in like the office, in that kind of sense of not trusting, or an example of what had happened to you in the corporate world?
So your question is just kind of what's the worst encounter that one can have, or you want something personal?
Well, both works. Whatever you prefer. Like if you don't want to give a personal example, I respect it, but it would be better.
Well, okay. Let me answer this in two ways. I mean, I will share also personal. I would say that the thing that I see most, that's the most difficult and hard to manage for a lot of executives and individuals that I coach, is this part around having, a bad boss. A bad boss who undercuts you. I mean, I've had individuals who the boss will take all the credit, not be helping their individuals at all. And so, I think it is a tough situation if you need the job, right? Or you're trying to build, a portfolio, you're trying to build a career. So some of it is sucking it up a little, but this is where you really need these skills to start to get out from under that boss without them retaliating against you. Building up other relationships in the company, taking on opportunities that get you out of that situation, which is really a dead-end situation. And frankly, a bunch of people do bring that on themselves because they think they're smarter than the boss. They show up the boss. They do stupid things to go around the boss, very blatantly. And if you put yourself in their shoes, right, you might be a decent individual, but if someone's trying to upstage you, say nasty things about you, or go around you all the time, you're probably going to retaliate. And so this is one of the key relationships you need to manage. And I would say that's, whether that's the worst thing, I've seen, pretty unethical things, but I think that goes without saying. But I'd say this is the toughest one for people to manage, is the bad boss relationship. From my own side, I would say here, sharing some of the stories, right? And I know Hernan has shared some of his. I've also been derailed, right? I've had an upward, very linear career, but there were certain stages where, and one in particular, I did not have a good relationship with my boss. And that came around and bit me on the butt, right? So that was a career limiting move that I did. And I think had I been more savvy and actually availed myself to mentors and sponsors to help me navigate that, and this is why I wrote the book, I think I would have navigated that more intentionally and strategically, that it would have turned out better. And to be fair, that one didn't turn out great, but I did have some sponsors in the company, and that actually, to my point here, saved me, because one of my sponsors really came up and says, you can't just push Michael out like that. We need to give him a good package, right? And so I don't want any of you guys to suffer from that. Chances are you're going to get some derailment in your career. But when you have it, right, it sucks. It's like you feel it like, what did I do wrong? Or what could I have done? And, you take that off then on people at home and other stuff, and you go through it, and some of the articles that I've written about that. I want people to not get derailed. I want people to be able to, use these skills in good ways, to help propel them and get things done. So Moises, does that answer your question there?
Yes, and I appreciate it. And well, it was a really nice talk from you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I love answering questions. So nothing is off the table here. I know this is a great group that works together. I think you guys ought to think about yourselves also, not only with your mentors, but kind of peers. One of the great things about coaching is I encourage people to have peer coaching relationships or pacing partners where you guys can come and talk about certain things you're seeing at work, and, how advising each other on how to navigate some of those things. Set up a reunion, right? Every couple of months where you guys get together. I mean, these are things that you guys can take on and going to help you.
Yeah. Before we go to Chris, real quick, and Akil, those we have two questions. I want to share something about a turnaround story real quick, and it's you mentioned something about be mindful of other people's agenda and work with them. It's so funny because some of my greatest enemies at work, I helped them out with their agenda, and all of a sudden they became my best friends. And I know you shared that a little bit in your book, no? Working with your enemy.
Yeah. I mean, this is, you are not always going to get to choose who you work with. And in fact, I know a lot of bosses who want to see how well you do, so they will pair you up with the person you hate. I think we've seen this, and it's a good way to see how people function, right? Now, this is not to say you need to always twist to someone's agenda, right? There's the part of maybe you can convince someone of another route, but to really know what people's agendas are, that is a way that can really propel you up if you can be helpful to them and they reciprocate, right? You've got to verify that they will reciprocate and help with those things. But I have seen that turn around a lot of really negative relationships. And if you can hit yourself to the rising star, that moves people up very quickly as well. And so these are, again, skills. There is a tool called a power map, which I use with all my executives, where you look at where power resides, what people care about from a business perspective, also from their ego. As you rise higher up, it's less about, certain business things. It's more about their egos, and who influences them and what things, influence them. And then suddenly you see what types of things can move the needle because of power, they have more of it, typically at the top versus people down below you. And so if one of those individuals says, well, hey, we're going to fund Daniela's initiative, right? Because of XYZ, because that resonates with me. Well, guess what? Daniela's positioned for more success, right? You need to be the one who's kind of being strategic and intentional about how to make that happen. Don't rely on other people to come and do it for you.
Excellent. I see two hands. So Chris, you were first, and then Akil.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Michael, for that presentation and the great tips. I guess for me, sometimes I struggle with, I guess, knowing how to approach my superiors or like my bosses, stuff like that, just to make sure that I'm making the best first impression or continuing to make a good relationship with them. I know you kind of touched on it, but what would you say is like the biggest piece of advice or what you would take to making sure that you establish a good first impression, a good relationship with those above you?
I'm going to answer this and turn it back on you for a minute. Okay, Chris or Christopher?
Yeah.
So you're now starting your job, right? So you're out there in the working world. You have 5 college freshmen who first year students who now see you kind of, just got a job or rising star, and they all want to come to you and get your advice and build a relationship with you. And those 5 kind of reach out and you picked one of them. What did the one do that really got it so the relationship with you clicked? Like, what was it about them or the way they reached out or what they did?
I guess it would be like the potential that I might see in that person, the work ethic, and just knowing that, I guess, the communication as well, dependability, different factors.
Like what kind of communication?
Seeing if they can hold, good conversation and communicate any problems that they may have. Knowing that if there's any conflicts or anything that I may need to share with them, there's like that open line that I could talk to them or share anything that I need to with them.
Yeah. I basically say, the answer here, right? You've just identified a couple things, right? That this person, is impact, cares, is thoughtful about these things and their communication with you. They're not wasting your time. They've been thinking about that. And so here's the exact same set of skills that you need to do and embody when you're reaching out. Okay? And what I would say here is there's many things that you can use, like we know, right? We gravitate to people who are similar to us. So things that you can tap into. You went to the same school, you maybe followed the same path in some way. Flattery works, saying, quality things, sincere things. You've looked up that person's background. You really admire something that they've done. And I would say there's an article I wrote on this. I'd say one of the most useful things you can do is also when you're kind of starting that relationship, go seek people's advice. Like actually using that word, seek their advice. You want their time. Don't pick their brain. A lot of people don't want to have their brains picked, but go seek their advice. And why this seeking advice is very useful. Okay, right? It's flattered when you get asked for advice because you're kind of being elevated as an expert. Okay. And if you seek advice around something specific, that person did some homework, right? To look and see what you were good at. And then advice, if you think about this versus like getting feedback from someone, when you say this, advice kind of is like this partnership, right? Where I'm going to give you something and, you know, tell you how I would do it. And it's like you want them to take you under your wing, right? This is how you get a sponsor, right? I would think of, you guys think about getting people to become your sponsor, not just mentors, but sponsors, the people who behind closed doors, the ones who are advocating for you. This is the number one way, right, that people move up in organizations, you know, getting high level sponsors to help them. So you want to be really strategic doing this in your job. I'd be thinking about 10 people and going and seeking different pieces of advice from them. And then turning those into coaching relationships, mentor relationships, sponsoring. And then of course, there are other things you can do as well, right? You know, if you want to be helpful, if you've done that power map, you know the things that matter to them. You know, you come to them with ideas, right? And you guys are also from a different generation. Think about the things that you know that they probably don't, right? Things that are related to social media, how those things can be harnessed, fintech, right? I mean, Dario's at the cusp, he kind of knows it, right? But a lot of the senior guys don't know this at all. And so what can you bring of value to them? And Christopher, I think the other thing I'll just say here is to ask, right? You're not always going to get it perfect. Not everyone's going to say yes. Not everyone's going to love you. That's okay. But if you get 2 out of 10, you're like way ahead. Dario, add to this. Yes.
Just to give some personal experience flavor on what Michael is explaining and how exactly touching a couple of things of what we've been discussing today. So I remember one of the techniques that I learned precisely from Michael, and he was mentioning, is flattering. At the beginning, I had a really tough time with that concept. You know, I don't want to brown nose. I don't want to flatter people, right? And one of the skill sets that you have to incorporate and to learn, right? So the story was okay. I was really looking to meet the CEO of a company. I just joined the company and I wanted to really get in touch with him in a different level, right? And I was always thinking, how can I really have this guy to know me and to have lunch and all that? And I was looking at this idea of flattering. So I thought, I really didn't like this guy, which also touched a lot in something that we discussed before. Is not your enemies or your friends. It's people that are aligned with one goal at some point, or people that are not aligned. So you might find friends that then becomes enemy, and the other way around. So I like to think in the terms of where strategically aligned or misaligned. So in that case, that CEO, let's say, that was the opposite of what I wanted, really misaligned, and I wanted to do some flattering. So what I learned is that instead of flattering the person, you can also flatter something that they have done, which comes to me very naturally. So it was a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I thought, you know, I really like how you handled this meeting. So I was not talking about him in person. I was saying, I really like how you handled this meeting because it was really, you show command and you really realign the goals and this and that. And I wanted to really let you know. And that was it. I didn't say anything else. And what happened is that immediately after that, we were saying goodbye. And he said, oh, thank you, Dario. And by the way, do you have any plans for having lunch? And so my goal of having lunch with him in the future and getting in a different level, right, happened immediately just because I was using one of these techniques that Michael has been discussing. So I wanted to share that because along my career, it's been also how can I understand different levels that you can use in different moments. So it's kind of this skill set is expanding, and you don't need to use all of them. You just need to know that they are there for you in different occasions. But I wanted to share this example because I was really shocked how easy it was and how well it worked, you know. And yes, we got lunch together, and that was another story for another day. I wanted to share that with all of you.
Yeah, and Christopher, I would say, I'm fond of saying that people, are irrational, but we're irrational in very predictable ways, right? You make people feel good about themselves, they're more inclined to like want to support you, right? We value things that seem like they're scarce and hard to get, right? When other people who influence us say good things about Christopher, I'm more inclined, right? Christopher. So when Dario recommended Hernan, I didn't know Hernan really that well, but I knew Dario, and if Dario vouched, and then I saw things and I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. I trust him. I start. So there's all these levers that you can be thinking about, like, Dario said, to help you.
Thank you. Akil, I know you had a question, no?
Yes, I guess so. I was just wondering, we talked a lot about how it's important to be ethical, being a servant leader and acting with integrity from one side, and from another side, sometimes I see people, they rise and they act unethically. Sorry. So I was just wondering, and there is a disconnect in these two ways of acting, and I was just curious how it works out in the long term, and whether it is really worth always acting with integrity and being ethical. And where is that line between right and wrong?
Yeah, so I would say, okay, so this we could have a long discussion about this, right? I would say that we have a lot of unethical leaders. I would say we have a lot of unethical behavior out there, right? In politics and in corporations, but I would ask you that anything that I've talked about or in my book here, or just share here, maybe what we've talked about, Akil, is what here have I talked about that has crossed the line or you feel is unethical? Is there a piece here that we could go in a specific example?
No, I didn't say, I'm not saying that we were talking about something unethical. I'm just saying that, yes, I see in life that there are like some corporations with unethical leaders, and all my colleagues from my maybe previous jobs, they were unethical and they were rising. So
yeah, so this is various points here, right? This is why you should do a snapshot of your organization. If you are seeing all these people rise that you feel are seriously unethical, probably gives you pause of whether you want to stay in that organization, right? Because those are the things that are probably going to get rewarded or take you upwards, okay? There's one point around ethics. The second point comes back to the thing I said at the very beginning, which is we have a lot of these terrible leaders, but they get into positions of power. We choose them. Boards put these people there. Countries choose certain individuals, right? Because they exhibit, they look confident, they sound confident, they have powerful networks, they control narratives, they influence people, they have powerful networks. So almost all of these pieces that I talked about are the drivers that would take people up. A lot of us are guilty that we elect or choose them. Okay? Now, what I'm saying is, look at that, because this is a big part about human behavior and organizations and how people get chosen. That doesn't mean it's necessarily right. But what we can say is, these forces are at work. How can we use those in ethical ways? Because the good people, they're not getting anywhere. They're sidelined, Akil. They didn't get elected. They're out writing, twiddling their thumbs. They're not in a position of power or impact. And so what we're saying is, if you can harness these things, build a network, show up strong and confident, harness your communication skills, get visibility and brand. I think there's lots of good examples of individuals like that. And then when those people get power, this is another big dimension of the book, you can do lots of things with power. You can change system for good. You can make a huge impact. You can run a very ethical organization. But what we get is sometimes these nice people who get trampled over by the very highly unethical people. And so this is what I'm saying, is that pay attention to those principles that are being used, because there's a lot about human behavior and organizational behavior that explains why those things are rewarded or paid attention to or elected. and then reframe it, and then start to use it, because that's going to supercharge and move you up. That's what I would say on this. And I hope that's, addressing the core of your question. Is there another piece there that is raised?
No, that's it. Yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. And Akil, I mean, this is one of the things I'd say is the piece around power. I would ask all of you, right, to say, you all want to rise, you all want to make an impact. And when you get in those positions, it's not always at the top that you have influence, right? It can be in a lot of different places. What do you want to do with that? What do you want to do with that? Yeah, you probably want to make some money, but deep down, I think a lot of us want to make an impact. And so to remind yourself, write that down on a piece of paper, guys, of what you're trying to do, because I guarantee a lot of people lose their way as they go up, right? They get attracted to money, the next thing, all their friends are getting, this or that, it's a rat race. So to think about some of those things so that when you get in those positions or you have that impact, what are you going to do? Because then you actually have a lot of these levers of power that you can use. And I'd say this is really important, right? We want you guys to go out and be great leaders. And we want you to have an impact. But first, you need to understand how to get in the positions or have the resources that start enabling you to really do that.
By the way, you bring something that's important, Michael, and it's your access, right? And in terms of your ethics, it's also important to understand where you draw the line, right? Where do you draw the line? Because I've left a couple of jobs because some things are unacceptable, right? Abuse to women. So I was raised by my mom. She was abused many times. She was rising her career, breaking glass ceilings in the 70s as CEO of her corporation. And I saw her suffer because of it. So for me, it is very important that we treat women with respect. So that's something of value to me. I don't see that. I go ballistic, right? So that's number one. Number two, finances, right? So my parents got divorced because of bad management of finances. Guess what? Guess why I'm a banker, right? And guess what happens when I see people stealing money? Those things are triggers. And again, I share these things with you because some of these things are deep inside of you, and some things are just unacceptable. And this is the moment where you have to draw the line and make a change, or it's going to eat you alive. And then you're going to be suffering, depressed, right? And I didn't have good mentors at that time. So guess why Apprentice Worldwide is here? Your career 911 of a bunch of mentors that are going to help you out. So again, your life story is also driving what impact you make in life. I'm making an impact with this organization. Michael is making an impact with what he does. Dario is making an impact because we have learned from our mistakes, but also we have lived lives, right? And we just pick ourselves up with the friends that we have around and make the best out of what we have in the future. Like I would be crying in the corner, but no, I pick myself up and I go to the next thing, right? And this is the value of having this network. So again, I didn't want to steal your thunder, Michael, but these things are when you talk about ethical behavior, sometimes you got to draw the line. You can take only so much. And at some changes in the company or you leave, right? Michael, I know we took a little longer. I made you wait a little bit more than I should have. Anything else that you want to share? Where can we find more of you, more of your work, your book? How can we get a hold of you? Please, we'd love to know.
So LinkedIn is the primary social media that I use. My website, which is www.Chang Wenderoth, Chang, half Chinese, changwenderoth.com. That's got a lot of resources on it, my newsletter, You can download the first chapters of the book there. The book, of course, is available on Amazon and so forth. But yeah, that is the primary way you find out what I'm doing and reaching me. So pleasure to be here, Hernan, and thank you for inviting me and for the group. I think it's a great organization, what you're doing. And all you guys also pay it forward. Pay it forward when, and you will, as you rise and you learn, bring that back into the organization to help the rest.
Thank you, Michael.
Maybe
And by
you
the
can,
way,
you can type. Maybe you can type that while we are wrapping up, Michael. Some people in the audience are asking for that in the chat, and I will add to that. I strongly recommend, if you can really read that book, that's really priceless. You know, the amount of knowledge that you're gonna get out of that is really good starting point. You know, so I think that at the end of the day, I always say the same: the decisions are taken by the ones that are sitting at the table. If you don't get yourself a seat on the table, you are not going to be part of the decision. You know, that's and it applies to your to the project, to your team, to the entire organization. You know, so the question is, how do you get that chair? How do you get to sit there, right? And I think that that power can be used in a good way or in a bad way. So we want all of you to be sitting on that chair to use power in that good way. So that's basically what we are trying to achieve here. So we also can fight for good causes in our careers, personally and professionally. So thank you very much, Michael and Fernand, my side.
thank you. Thank you again, guys. And I hope to see you in Madrid, hopefully next month, for the Apprentice Worldwide networking event. September 1st is when we have it scheduled. Barcelona, August 30th. So we're gonna be there networking with some of my favorite people. And by the way, Dario, no te escapas. You're coming over here at some point and speaking to this crowd, okay?
Always a pleasure, and I'm happy to do that.
Excellent. Michael, again, thank you for trusting me. I know trust and verify. I hope that you are, you realize that we're cut from probably the same cloth. We have a lot of things in common, and I really loved all the stuff that you do, man. I appreciate it.
Go forward. I'm looking forward to hearing great things from this group. I think it's exciting. So go forth and make your mark.
Thank you. Guys, have a good evening. You'll find the recording later on, and I'll share Michael's information in our groups. Again, thank you. Have a great night. By the way, congratulations to our graduates.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Hernan.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.